Hi, and welcome to Faith, Art, and Tiny Houses. I'm your host, Carmen Shank. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. It's Tiny House Tuesday, and I want to talk to you today about simplicity for entrepreneurs. Now, this is a subject that's very close to my heart. I am a serial entrepreneur. I have had 2 art galleries and a restaurant, and I also had a business management service that served a number of clients concurrently. So I am an entrepreneur. My dad's a business analyst, and I am through and through an entrepreneur, and love the opportunity to express myself and to try to make a living in the process, right? And through that experience, I have learned some things about what it takes to live the entrepreneur life and to live it as successfully as possible. And when you combine that with my experience living in a tiny house of 125 square feet for 3.5 years, I think I have a really unique I believe I have a really unique perspective on simplicity for entrepreneurs. Now, when we went tiny, we were hitting the reset button on our lives. We had this opportunity to take a step back. We bought our house straight up with cash, so we did not need money for a mortgage. Our utilities were squished dramatically. Our entire house plugged into one household 15 amp household outlet. So our electricity bill was slashed. Our water bill was non-existent because we had a water source for free water that we carried. By we, I mean my handsome husband. It seems important to mention that when I say we carried the water to our tiny house, I'm not actually talking about me. So we understand what that means, carried the water to our house, and we both, actually in this case, both worked at ways of conserving water, because trust me, when you carry water to your home, you are not going to shower it all down the drain in the next 10 minutes. It's just not going to work that way. So 3.5 years with zero mortgage, no water bill, a phenomenally reduced electricity bill, property taxes gone, big insurance on the big house gone. I mean, all of that stuff was a pretty dramatic change for us, and it really meant that we had the freedom to turn down some offers when it came to our business. My husband's a pipe organ builder, so it gave us the opportunity, since we lived so simply, it gave us the opportunity to take contracts that we wanted. And if we had any indication that this was a client that was really going to be difficult down the road, then we had the freedom to walk away. And that was a beautiful thing. It allowed us to hit the reset button and to do some healing from a really overrun, overwhelmed life that was desperately needed, because we had just closed down the restaurant and sold it. Hallelujah. And I was running and managing the restaurant. He was out working on pipe organs, and we didn't get to see each other very much. And as far as I'm concerned, for a pair of entrepreneurs, that is no life. I mean, I have a business, he has a business, we have another one between us. I mean, we still have 3 businesses. That's not an issue. We're entrepreneurs. We're always going to have these projects going on. But the issue was we never got to see each other. Now we're doing work that we love, and we're here in the same property pretty much most of the time. I mean, he's out and about a lot too with pipe organs, but for the most part, our work is right here on the property. And I'm going to pause the idea there for a second, because earlier today when I was going to start recording, the neighbor started mowing the yard, and now I'm hearing a helicopter going over. So I'm going to file this under podcaster problems. It's just it's a little aside for all of you who are interested in podcasting, and that's one of the things you may find amusing when you hit the record button, is that suddenly the neighborhood goes crazy. But anyway, I've mentioned that I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had a number of businesses, and we live tiny. And I want to suggest to you that if you have a big dream, if you have a vision for a business you would like to do, or a ministry, ministry I think is the church's code word for meaningful work. And I think meaningful work is something that we all want. to have that clarity and conviction that what we do when we get up in the morning is something that really matters to us, that we're not saying yes sir, no sir all day long and working towards somebody else's vision, but that we're actually being able to have a meaningful work that is determined by our own vision and purpose in life. And so for me, I think this whole idea of simplicity and entrepreneurship is the perfect match. It is a match made in heaven, and it is my faith and my hope that this perfect match between simplicity and entrepreneurship is something that gives birth to success. Now, I've seen that over and over again. I don't know if you know who Lisa Nichols is. If you don't know, you need to go to YouTube and enter Lisa Nichols. She tells the story. She's a motivational, transformational speaker. She tells the story of having a vision, and she had such a vision, and she was coming from a place of poverty, and she is currently, her company, which is her brand, is publicly traded, and she's worth kind of a lot, a big number. I don't know what the number is, doesn't matter to me, but she's a remarkable person. And in her story, she gave up her 3-bedroom apartment and moved into her friend's spare room, her and her son. Her friend was a smoker, and so she tells the story of pushing towels along the bottom of the door so the cigarette smoke wouldn't come into her room, and so she and her son wouldn't have to smell it. And you know what? To me, that is a picture of sacrifice, but even more powerfully, it's a picture of somebody who's going to radically simplify things in order to see that vision become a reality, in order to sow into that business in a way that she could focus and that she could set herself up for success. Simplicity is really cool like that because it can become a really helpful tool in setting us up for success. I was listening to an interview between Mike Kim and Jeff Brown just yesterday. It was really a fantastic interview. It's a part of a series, Boss Free Summit, which is spectacular, by the way. Everything that I've seen and been a part of with that has been spectacular. Talking about Mike's movement away from his 6-figure C-suite job to becoming a solopreneur, and how did he navigate that shift? How did he know it was time? And since he was making such a big number, he, in consultation with a friend, decided, well, he needed to have a savings account in place that would be enough for 3 months so that he and his wife at the time could move forward knowing at least that there were 3 months of income in the bank, that it would take some of the pressure off of the startup so he could actually really focus on that and not have to focus on making enough money for peanut butter, right? So what he did is that he worked really hard on his side hustle until he got to a certain dollar figure. And then when they reached that dollar figure, then they were able to make the shift from that full-time gig that took 80 hours of his week away to his entrepreneurship passion project. And he was able to make that work, but he sacrificed that big number salary. And it's remarkable where he is today. See, we think of these things in terms of this is such a huge sacrifice. But what I want you to understand is that when you're standing at the other side, having achieved the goal, and you look back, is it really the sacrifice? 3.5 years living in a tiny house of 125 square feet made it possible for me to live the dream of becoming a published author. And as I look back on that, and as I think of, was it a sacrifice to live tiny for 3.5 years? My answer to that question is no, absolutely not. I gained so much more than just financial freedom from living tiny that it was one of the best choices I've ever made in my life. Quite frankly, we gained a level of intimacy living in those close quarters that I loved. And we had financial freedom because we had no mortgage and our utilities were cut, by a huge amount. And it gave us freedom to be a one-income family for a while. And all of what we gained by going tiny meant so much to me and continues to mean so much to me that it doesn't feel like a sacrifice to me. It doesn't feel, in retrospect, as a sacrifice to me. Now, there were points along the way that it did feel like a sacrifice. But those are times when you just talk to yourself and remind yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. And it really is important to keep focused on that why, because sometimes that temporary lack of comfort or creature comforts or that difficult transition between living really big and trying to jam that whole big normal lifestyle into a teeny tiny little box, that transition is not an easy one, and it sometimes takes a while. Like those 3.5 years, I mean, it took me a while to get to the place where I understood what it took to live that way and to embrace it and to get really good at it. And these days, I'm not crazy about living in any other way, to be honest with you. I mean, now I'm standing in my living room of our 700 square foot home that we purchased. So it was actually standing in what was the piano workshop. We purchased this place to use that part of it for the workshop for building pipe organs, and this part of it for restoring a piano right here where I'm standing. Well, that piano's not here. There's another one coming in this spot, so I'll have to move my podcast to another spot before long. But that made possible, the fact that we lived mortgage free with such reduced expenses for 3.5 years gave us the freedom to start a business with the ability to say no to some clients and say yes to projects that really, really matter to us. So that's kind of a cool thing. So as you're looking at your entrepreneurship life and you're looking at ways you can simplify, 3 ways that I would encourage you to simplify. And I know there's going to be some sense of defensiveness that might come up in this conversation. And so I'm going to just be really clear that I care about you enough. I'm going to be really honest with you. Okay. So from my experience as an entrepreneur and a tiny house person, I can tell you that number 1, you can simplify your shelter. I've done it. I know you can do it. Number 2, you can simplify your transportation. Now, Xavier and I currently own, I think, 6 vehicles. It kind of fluctuates because Xavier is a car guy, okay? So we, all of them are free and clear. 4 of them are vintage. Driving a vintage automobile means you're not dealing with inspections. You're not dealing with all of those things that require a little bit of time here and there, which isn't a big deal, but the fact is it always comes at a time when it takes your focus away from something that's more important. So for us, driving vintage vehicles has been a way to clear up some mental space because we don't have to deal with warranties. We don't have to deal with dealerships. We don't have to deal with big insurance amounts. We don't have to deal with debt. So that has made our lives a lot simpler. Now, I know not everybody is incredibly mechanically gifted as my husband is. And so in that case, I would encourage you to just take a look at your transportation situation and see if there's ways that you can trade in vehicles with debt on vehicles that don't have debt. And that doesn't mean necessarily buying a vintage vehicle. It doesn't mean necessarily buying something that has a lot of problems that need fixing. It may just mean driving a much more modest vehicle that's newer. So I would encourage you to take a look at simplifying your shelter. For me, that meant going tiny. Simplifying your transportation, that for me means driving vintage vehicles because they're easier and a whole lot cheaper. And actually, to be honest with you, a whole lot more fun. I love my MGB. My husband loves it. I have a 1974 MGB. My husband has a 1969 Opel Rekord, which is his favorite car. We have a 1984 Mercedes 300 CD, which is a kind of a rare car with one of the best engines ever built. We try these really cool, interesting things. Oh, we have a truck for work and we have the schoolie, and there's a couple things I'm forgetting. Actually, we just sold a truck. Anyway, none of that really matters. We have a fleet. We're fleet people. It just kind of works out that way. And I'm not suggesting that you own as many cars as we do. I don't think that's necessarily simplicity, but that's how it's I can recommend highly driving a vintage vehicle. I think that's something that's been really good for us. But the main thing when it comes to simplifying your transportation is to get out of debt. That's the biggest thing. And then the third thing to really consider coming back on, and this one is for you ladies, and I know you're going to hate me, but I want you to understand that I'm saying these things from a perspective of somebody who's been there. Okay, so that manicure, the pedicure, massage, facial, hair removal, hair, expensive hair cuts, colors, all that stuff, taxing, waxing, tanning, taxing, waxing, but all of that stuff. I know we have been taught to believe that's self-care. I want to encourage you to think about it and think about the money that is aimed at you to convince you that all of that is self-care. See, to me, I think that's retail therapy, consumerism. I think all of those things are important. We need to have our nails done. We need to take care of our hair. We need to relax. We need to find suitable ways to relax. But I think self-care really needs to be focused on wellness. Okay, if self-care is focused on wellness, like making sure we're moving, making sure we're sleeping, making sure we're eating well, that is a really redemptive kind of wellness and self-care that can really set you up for success. And if you are so dedicated to having those things in your life, I would just challenge you if you want that or if you want your dream. And for some people, you're going to have to actually give up the expensive purse or the, monthly shoe purchase or whatever. You're actually going to have to make what's going to feel a little sacrificial in the moment for the meaningful work that you want more than you want the shoes. For me, there has been a season as an entrepreneur where I haven't had the manicure, pedicure, massage, facial, hair done by somebody else, tanning, waxing, all of that stuff. I haven't had other people doing that because these are things I can do for myself. I have extremely simplified my hair system. I have extremely simplified. I still use a luxury product line for skincare and makeup. We can talk about that another day. But there are places to cut back on costs, and that's the whole retail therapy category. What we define as self-care and what we define as wellness is something we could really debate for a while, and I don't want to derail the train right now. What I want to suggest to you is that there are ways that you can cut back if you are used to having all of these services at your fingertip. And there are a lot of us who have learned to really simplify those routines. I don't use products on my hair except for colors. I literally don't use the hair dryer or the curling iron or the straight iron or any, my routines on skincare and self-care are so simple, but they're focused on wellness. They're focused on moving, sleeping, and eating well, and they're focused on bringing healing and not putting on a exterior or fitting a role that society expects of me. I have found a lot of freedom from that need to perform in these ways. And I view it as freedom coming from this perspective. And I know it's hard to hear, but I've sat across the table from women who are consuming thousands of dollars of services, and they're telling me they don't have money to do what I've done. They don't have money to spend some time writing a book and finding a good publisher. They don't have time and money to do that, but yet I see what they're investing in the $1,000 purse and the extremely expensive car. And so it's a disconnect for me, and I would just simply ask yourself, I know the temptation here is to get really defensive, but I would simply ask you to ask yourself the question, what do I want the most? What do I want the most? Do I want meaningful work in my life, or do I want this manicure? Do I want meaningful work in my life? I mean, there are times when it really is an either or, and there are times when it's not. Okay, if you've got the money to do those things and to be your entrepreneur self, that's cool. But what I'm talking about more specifically in this episode is that startup period where maybe the money is a little bit tight, and you will have to make some choices that feel like sacrifices in the moment to achieve that goal. Now there's two things, and we've talked about this a little bit, but there's two things that I would encourage you not to cut back on at all. And those are food and self-care. Now, early on in our, we've talked about self-care already, but early on in our tiny house journey, we learned some lessons the hard way when it comes to food. Now, we're retired restaurant owners. We are, hardcore foodies. We love, love, love food. But I was coming from some kind of health issues that had come because of working so hard with the restaurant. And Xavier had some health issues as well, brought on by the level that we were working at. So when we first went tiny, we told ourselves that our house was really too small to really cook and eat at home. That was the story we told ourselves. But then we started to realize that if we ate out, and if we ate out at inexpensive places, we would start to feel it pretty quick. We would just feel run down and like we weren't firing on all cylinders. But if we started going to the nicer places and the finer places, well, one of the reasons the food is so good is because it's loaded with the good stuff, like bacon, fat, and butter, and the things you wouldn't cook with at home because it seems like way too much fat or way too much whatever, too much sugar or whatever. That's all the stuff that's in the food at high-end places. So we found that high-end restaurants, fine dining, didn't really suit us because it would have one kind of effect on the body, and the other side of just kind of going to fast food or lower caliber places had a different effect on the body. So neither one of them seemed to us to be good options in terms of eating out as a way to simplify our food situation. So one of the things that we tried was some of those subscription services where you get a meal kit. Now, I struggle with these, just to be really honest with you, because there's so much packaging. It is an ecological disaster. There's so much plastic. I hate it. It drives me a little over the edge. So as far as I'm concerned, I have trouble with those services because there is so much waste. On the flip side, it's so convenient. There's a lot of choices, and they're very well put together, thought out meals. If you've got some food intolerances like I do, or if you're following a certain diet plan like Whole30 or vegetarian or vegan, those meal options are readily available in those services. There's a lot of those services now, and so you can find ones that suit however it is that you've chosen to eat, or if you've got food intolerances, it makes it pretty simple to avoid some things. And having that food show up at your door, and when you get home from work and are thinking, okay, what am I having for supper? It's which of 3 choices am I having for supper, or which of 2 choices, or, it really does simplify in that sense. It does, on the other hand, mean that you're spending maybe a little bit more time with recycling and that kind of thing. So maybe there's a trade-off, but I think some of those food kit services are a viable way, and please, Lord, let them get better at the packaging, are a viable way of simplifying and increasing the quality of the food that you eat, which is so important, because one of the things that can derail a startup business is when the owner is so stressed out that they start to experience health issues. If you go into a business with really good health, and you are working these insane hours, and you're just always on, and you're struggling, and maybe there's some financial concerns, it can really take a toll on the body. So it becomes really, really important to eat well and to do all your self-care. Make sure you're moving, sleeping, all of those things. Make sure you do know how to relax and take some time away from work now and then. All of that self-care and eating well stuff, when you are an entrepreneur, that needs to go up. That's what you need to increase. And the things you can decrease are spending on transportation and shelter and consumerism and retail therapy. Those are the things you shrink and minimize to make room for meaning, and eating well and taking really great care of yourself so that you need less healthcare down the road. Those are things that you really need to amp up when you are embracing a new startup project and embracing a more meaningful existence by starting a business or taking on some volunteer work, or all of those things that you dream about, but that you say, oh, well, I can't really do that because, and then you start listing what you need. Well, What you need is based on what you're used to. If you change what you're used to, it will change what you need. And that's why I'm a big proponent of tiny house living. The tiny house can't change your life, but the simplicity required to live in a tiny house successfully, that will change your life. And that's good stuff. So, entrepreneurs that are listening, go for it. Go for it. Go for it. I am all in when it comes to living the vision that you've been given, living in your calling, living that meaningful dream life that you've been longing for. And that may mean leaving the job, which may mean less income, which is where simplicity comes in. And that can really be a really good partner for you in the process of making your way toward your dream life. I'm Carmen Shank. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
You can follow me on Instagram at Carmen Rose Shank. You can subscribe to my channel on YouTube, please do. And you can download us on iTunes. Theme music is composed by William Kirkpatrick, lyrics by Louisa Stead, arranged and performed by classical guitarist Jonathan Crispin. Show notes available at carmenshank.com.